The question I was asked was where in the world I would like to travel. I chose China. The first stop on my trip was Beijing. Beijing is also known as Peking, and it is located in northern China. Beijing is a major transportation hub with dozens of roads and railways. The city alone nearly contains 9 million people. In Beijing, people speak the Beijing dialect, which belongs to the Mandarin subdivision of Chinese. Beijing is also one of the 4 ancient capitals of China. Before heading out on my first day of sightseeing, I wanted to take part in a truly Chinese cultural experience. I decided to try Tai Chi. Tai Chi is a system of slow meditative physical exercise designed for relaxation and balance and health. My first stop in Beijing was the Bird's Nest. The Bird's Nest has contemporary significance because it was built to host the 2008 Summer Olympics. The Bird's Nest is also known as the National Stadium. It cost $423 million to build and took almost 5 years to complete. Although the Bird's Nest was a very great place for the Summer Olympics, it hasn't had much activity since. It did host the Italian Super Cup and the Opera of Turandot. The choice of China to host the Olympics was criticized by some because there are concerns about China's records on human rights, on things like capital punishment, one-child policy, lack of freedom of the press and religion, along with lack of labor rights. My next stop was the Great Wall of China. This has both geographical and historical significance because it was built to keep the Chinese isolated from the rest of the world and protection from the Huns. The Great Wall is 5,500 miles long and was built mostly by the Ming Dynasty. The entire wall took 2,000 years to build. The Chinese started building in 221 BC as a series of small walls that were later joined together by the Qing Dynasty. One common myth is that the Great Wall can be seen from the moon with the naked eye. This is actually not true. Many astronauts have tried even at low orbit, but none have actually reported being able to see it. My next stop was the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City has great historical significance to China. The city was built in the early 1500s for the Ming Emperor named Yang Li. It was used as the emperor's metropolis. If a regular person were to enter the palace, they'd be killed immediately. It is one of the most dazzling pieces of architecture in the world. It is repainted every couple years, but they do keep some buildings as the originals. The complex consists of 980 buildings with over 8,700 rooms. It took over 15 years to build and took over 1 million workers to build it. The Forbidden City is surrounded by a 26-foot high wall and a 171-foot wide moat. My last stop in Beijing was the Summer Palace. This has geographical significance to China because it stretches for 9.3 miles and is the largest royal park in China. The Summer Palace was constructed by the Qing Dynasty in the year 1750 and started out as the Garden of Ripples, originally for the royal families. It was nearly destroyed, then rebuilt in the early 1900s, is now one of the most classical gardens in the world, and a popular relaxing spot for tourists. On day 2, I went to Hangzhou and Suzhou. My first stop was the Suzhou Silk Factory. This has cultural significance because it is one of the largest silk factories in China. Silk is used a lot in China to make textiles and was used as early as 6000 BC. One of the earliest discoveries of silk in China was made by Chai Ling Shi when she accidentally dropped a silkworm into her hot cup of tea, and she observed that there was a thread that could be used to weave. One silk cocoon can produce 1,000 meters of silk. The Chinese use silk for many things in their culture, and this is one of the biggest silk factories in all of China. My next stop in Suzhou was the National Embroidery Institute. This has cultural significance because in this building there are Chinese craftsmen that make silk embroideries that express Chinese culture. The only thing that tourists do not realize is that the silk embroideries are extremely expensive. My next stop was the Longjing Green Tea Plantation. This is one of the largest tea plantations not just in China, but the world. They call their tea emperor tea, or as we would know it, green tea. This tea is treated very well and made by hand, so it is one of the most expensive teas one will find. The reason why this plantation has cultural significance is that tea is a very big part of Chinese culture. They believe it is very good for your health and can even heal the sick. After visiting the plantation, I decided to take part in another cultural experience, a Chinese tea ceremony. This ceremony focuses on what the tea tastes like, smells like, and how one tea tastes compared to the previous tea. I tasted many different teas, and they all tasted awesome. My next stop was the West Lake in Hangzhou. West Lake has geographical significance because of its size. It is over 1,404 acres of water and has been a very big attraction for many people. Its depth is surprisingly shallow. On average, it is only 5 feet. The lake has 5 distinct sections. The largest is called the Outer Lake. There is also the North Inner Lake, Yuhu Lake, the West Inner Lake, and the Lesser Lake. One of the cool features of this lake is a man-made island that has 4 little pools. At night, these candles jutting out of the water created the impression of 3 moons. On day 3, I traveled to Shanghai. My first stop in Shanghai was the Shanghai Silk Rug Factory. This factory is where mass amounts of rugs are made, and it really is an amazing process. They hand weave every single rug, and it can take months just to create one rug. They usually have one person working on the loom, which seems to really slow down the process. The way that they make these designs on the rugs is that the weaver looks at a piece of paper and weaves what they see with silk. After the carpet is done, it goes through a process of clipping to give the design more dimensions and make it stand out more. Although these rugs are very beautiful, they are also extremely expensive. My next stop in Shanghai was the Yu Garden. This has historical significance in China because this garden is over 400 years old. It is located in the middle of Old Town, Shanghai. It took 20 years for Zhang Yongduan to build and all of his savings. The reason why he built it was to please his parents in their old age. The name of the garden translates into peace and comfort. One of the largest gardens with the old style, and it was opened to the public in 1962. It is a very beautiful place filled with extravagant buildings. My last stop in Shanghai was to take a tour of the maglev train system. The train was first launched in 2003 and had a contemporary government significance because it was built by the Chinese government at a cost of $1.4 billion. Unlike most trains, it does not use any wheels. It uses a magnetic cushion between the track and the train. It travels at a top speed of 267 miles per hour. It runs 19 miles long, going between downtown Shanghai and the airport, and it has no risk to the people even though there is no driver. After a day of sightseeing in Shanghai, I decided to visit a local market. This outdoor market sold everything from food to fabric. The strangest thing I saw was fighting crickets. In all the craziness of the markets, all I managed to buy was a deck of cards. The cards cost about 50 Chinese yuan, which is about $7.60. As I reflected on China's society, I noticed that it was a lot like America. There is a large middle class of people. The rich live well, but the poor do not live as well. There are still people begging on the streets. Education in China is taken very seriously. They start as early as 4 years old. Unlike us, they have very long school days. On average, kids attend school 8.5 hours a day, but there are some schools that are 12 hours long with 5 hours of homework. I also learned that in its history, China has had many dynasties and has gone through difficult economic times. Buddhism is the major religion in China, followed by Taoism and Confucianism. The biggest celebration in China is the New Year celebration on January 1st. It is celebrated to start out a new year. Followed by the Spring Festival, where the Chinese people celebrate to thank God for letting them get through the winter and the changing of the seasons. Agriculture, business, and industry is basically the same as America. There are similar jobs, some important, some less important. They also give the world mass amounts of products because they work very fast and very cheap. The two things that I will remember about my trip to China are its buildings and its people. The architecture is amazing, and the people were warm and friendly.